Okay. How about now?
I've been on this episodic journey for months. Exploring this canon through the lens of this one. This journey has taken me to many places. But that's par for the course when it comes to ambassadorship. Hey, I go by V Lauren on social media, but you can call me Victoria, and welcome to episode 2 of A Canon on the Canon, the Mark series. In the introductory episode to this series, I talked about how each of these canons got their names, and the meaning of being a canon ambassador, but just not in the way that you think. I'm a photographer, but my photography journey doesn't begin with this canon. Instead, it begins with this one. You can't embrace the message of this canon without it completely transforming your life. So I am an ambassador of the message that this canon contains, which makes me an ambassador of Christ. As an ambassador, my task is to make the message known. All I can really do is explain, clarify, or support the message. It is not my goal to preach to you in this series, because I don't have a pulpit nor desire one to preach from. But as I venture out with this canon in tow, it is my aim just to simply follow and tell the story. Whatever story that is unfolding before my eye, my goal is to capture it and tell it as accurately as I can. And my approach in this series is no different. So this series is what you could call a witness album. I first came across this term in a study called Every Picture Can Tell God's Story. The whole premise of a witness album is to use photographs to help you tell God's story of salvation with meaning and conviction. You can be a winsome witness of Jesus using your own personal photographs and experiences. And photographs provide a gateway to share the gospel. As a photographer, I often return to my favorite subjects to find inspiration and new ways of seeing them. I believe that studying scripture is quite similar. I've gone through this canon from cover to cover. And regardless of how many times I go through it, there's always something new that resonates with me. In many ways, I feel like meaningful Bible study mirrors the art of photography. Just as a good photographer doesn't simply take a snapshot, but contemplates the lighting, composition, and context of their subjects to make their images, an intensive Bible student avoids merely skimming the text. Instead, they pay attention to the details, specific words, phrases, literary devices, while also investigating the historical and cultural context to get a better picture of the text. And that's exactly how we will be approaching this series, like a good photographer and an attentive Bible student. I'll be taking a literalist, verse-by-verse approach, which means that we'll be taking a straightforward look at the Gospel of Mark, focusing on each verse's plain meaning. What this comes down to is defining what the words are, taking them at its literal meaning, reading the history behind them, and allowing the surrounding verses to explain the meaning. My goal is to step back as much as I possibly can, set my own biases aside, and let the true experts speak, the historians, scholars, and commentators. Hence my heavy use of commentaries in this series, which I'll cite in the description box as well as throughout each episode. One of the physical hardback commentaries that you'll see me use throughout this series is the New Testament in Color, a multi-ethnic Bible commentary spearheaded by Esau McCulley. You might also see this Bible here, which is the New International Version, the NIV, but I'll primarily be reading the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. But I'm not opposed to Bible hopping here and there. I'll read from the NIV, or I'll read from the BSB, the NKJV, the NLT, the GNT, the ESV, the ERV. So I'm not opposed to reading different Bibles. But for this series, for the text, we are primarily going to be reading from the New American Standard Bible, and on occasion, I will have the NIV on deck or in hand, So my task in this series is to be a curator. So I'm gathering all of this information together from the scholars and commentaries, and I want to put it together in a neat and concise way to present it to you. I am not a theologian or a Bible expert in any means. I don't have any theology degrees yet. I believe if we should scrutinize anything, it should be how people come to their conclusions surrounding the scriptures, especially since false teaching is so prevalent. So I would like to acknowledge any potential biases that I may have as we go through this series. There's not many labels that I would put on myself or my theology per se, because I want to keep my theology simple. Therefore, I try not to allow any current cultural, political views to color my reading or interpretation of the Gospels. My bias, if anything, is desiring to read the text from its cultural and historical context. I want to dive into the world that these people lived in before us and find practical parallels. I want to understand how they might have interpreted the words of Jesus given their social, cultural, political context. And I'm also interested in the many ways that scripture interprets itself. So I'm looking for themes and bridges between the Old and New Testament, hence why I read the Old Testament with a Christocentric or Christological approach. Beyond that, like I said before, I don't like to put a lot of labels on my theology. But if I were to put any labels on it, I would say that I am a Protestant, non-denominational, Trinitarian Christian. And that's it. So in this reading, as we go through Mark and other canonized texts, I will always lead with the question, what does this verse mean in its historical and cultural context? My purpose is that I don't want to infuse our modern debates and biases into the text. So I'm seeking resources and commentaries that help to explain how the verses in the New Testament connect with what has been written in the Old Testament. I don't want to create a space with a back and forth from various Christian tribes, camps, or wings, but create an environment of illumination in which you have this aha moment and marvel at the Lord's intentionality and wisdom. So here's what's to come in this series. The next 3 episodes of this series include what I would like to say are light apologetic episodes. So we're going to look at what the scholars have to say as we answer the questions of, can we trust that Mark wrote his gospel? Is Mark's gospel reliable? Who was Mark's source of his gospel? And then in the next 3 episodes, we're going to talk about Mark's identity, answering the questions of, what's the relationship between Mark and his source? Who's the Mark of the New Testament? And who's the Mark of African tradition? And right before we dive into Mark's gospel, did Mark write his gospel first? And after that, then we'll begin with Mark chapter 1, verse 1. However, along the way, I will be releasing bonus content in a B-side series of A Canon that tell the stories of some of the historic landmarks that we'll be visiting along this journey and how they connect with what has been written in the text, as well as how they connect to each episode. So I invite you to take this journey with me as we bring Mark's gospel to life. Whether you're reading the gospels for the very first time or you're revisiting familiar passages, this series will deepen your understanding and help you to see how our everyday life is relatable to what transpired in the first century. So journey with Jesus and witness his ministry, miracles, and message as never before. Don't just read the story, see it, feel it, and hear it as Mark, the gospel writer, intended. So welcome to A Canon, the Mark series.